Today's podcast of Hellbent for Horror is brought to you by Audible.com. Get a free audiobook download and a 30-day free trial at audibletrial.com/Hellbent for Horror. Audible has over 180,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle, or MP3 player. Hi, and welcome to Hellbent for Horror, a podcast devoted to all things related to horror. I'm S.A. Bradley, and I'm a lifelong movie lover, but my heart belongs to horror. My biggest thrill, however, is getting to talk to people about this stuff. I really want to start conversations with you. Hi, everybody. Before I start the show today, I want to tell you all again how grateful I am that you are listening to Hellbent for Horror. I absolutely love doing this show, and I'm so happy that we're starting conversations. I'm hearing from listeners, and it is so great. I'm glad I'm able to give you something that you feel good enough about to take the time to write me. I know you're busy in your lives, and the fact that any of you have ever taken the time to send me an email to tell me what you like or you don't like really means a lot to me. Hey, I'm just a guy who loves horror and wants to share that love and appreciation with everyone. Hellbent for Horror is a grassroots effort. I write the episodes. My wife is my producer. My brother-in-law helps me with sound editing. We do it because we love horror. I want to keep doing this show at the level you've become accustomed to, or better. So I'm starting a Patreon page for Hellbent for Horror. If you don't know, Patreon is a crowdfunding site for people to support creators of all sorts of work. People can support creators by signing up to Patreon and pledging a set amount for each episode that I would release. If I don't put out an episode, you don't get charged. If you like Hellbent for Horror and you feel inspired to contribute even as little as $1, it will really help me continue to devote my time and effort to the show. Your patronage enables me to expand my horror horizons and hopefully yours. Only contribute if you want to. I've set up different support levels, and there are little tokens of thanks at each of the levels, from access to Patreon activity feeds to, say, monthly web hangouts where we can talk directly about horror. You can find my page at patreon.com and then do a search for Hellbent for Horror. I'll also have a direct link to it on my website. Also, there's all kinds of ways to support. Your support also can be writing reviews of the show on iTunes and Stitcher so that we can get found by other horror fans and grow. Thank you so much for allowing me to talk with you. It is a pleasure. So it's that time of the year again when family and friends join in time-honored traditions. It's when bands of costume men in hideous masks travel from house to house at night, swinging poles with horse skulls on them, and children leave out offerings to appease a family of homicidal trolls who come out of the mountains to eat them, and supernatural beings spy from the rooftops and report every sin to a godlike figure on a horse. And a dark presence, dressed in dirty, tattered clothes, comes out of the forest and whips the backs of bad children to mark them. Sometimes this figure travels with a chained horned demon who he lets loose on the kids. All of this can only mean one thing. It's Christmas time. Now, I know that some of this might sound quite foreign to you, but these creepy public rituals are connected to the traditions we celebrate here in America. And these scary creatures are the forefathers to our own supernatural being, Santa Claus. America, always the great melting pot, borrowed from the immigrants who settled here to create our own jolly and benevolent man from the North Pole. But even though we know him as a friendly gift giver, there's still something creepy about him. Even though he's all smiles, there's something ambiguously threatening about this guy. Even his theme song is vaguely menacing. He sees you when you're sleeping. He knows when you're awake. He knows if you've been bad or good, so be good for goodness sake. Why? What is he going to do to me if I'm not good? Maybe that's why little kids cry so much when they sit on Santa's lap. On a primal, instinctual level, the little kid knows there's something up. What is the purpose of parents literally handing off their child to a stranger seated on a throne. The parents could easily hold the child, but the ritual is to have the child separate from them, offered up to Santa, literally in his grasp. And then he looks the child in the eye and says, "Have you been naughty or nice?" It sounds a lot like a kid's version of Last Judgment to me. Of course, it's just a keepsake photo opportunity today, and nobody is entirely sure where that custom started. But it is so specific in the setup and the routine that it's hard to believe it would be thought up randomly. But it's just one thing in a long line of old rituals that have become benign and forgotten. Like the stuff I mentioned earlier. Now, unless you live in Newfoundland or some villages in Ireland, you won't see the old-fashioned mummers with horse skulls and bizarre masks. And unless your family is Pennsylvania Dutch, you probably don't fear getting whipped with a maple branch by Belsnickel or Rumpelig. Those are Germany's mean Santas. If your family's from Holland, you might know about Sinterklaas on his horse and his spies, the Black Peets. And if your family is from Iceland, you know about the 13 Yule Lads, the psychotic spawn of mountain trolls. And even though it's been Americanized, Christmas still has a lot of weird shit going down. Flying reindeer and talking snowmen and cookies that come to life and elves and glowing lights in the trees. Even A Christmas Carol is full of ghostly apparitions. And at the center of all this is a stranger who enters your house while you sleep. Even if the door is locked and you have no chimney, he can slide in under the door or through a keyhole. And with all this crazy, creepy, supernatural stuff going on, you'd think we'd get some good horror films out of this. But you'd be wrong. Now, it's not like there's no Christmas-themed horror movies out there. It is a cottage industry all to its own. And I counted close to 100 titles when I researched this episode. And there's probably another 100 no-budget titles that went directly to Netflix that I missed. But most of these films just aren't good horror movies. Considering how much material there is to work with, I'm amazed at just how unimaginative these movies are. Christmas horror movies are a weird bunch of misfits. You have the transgressive Killer Santa movies. These try to offend the people who would never watch them in a million years anyway. Most of these feature a maniac who dresses like Santa and slaughters people. Other than that, they're standard issue slasher films. The only transgression is a wardrobe choice. Of course, that wardrobe choice was highly controversial in 1984 when Silent Night, Deadly Night got pulled from theaters. The PTA saw the poster of Santa going down a chimney with an axe and protested the movie on the strength of that poster alone. I saw the movie in the theater before it got pulled, and if you saw the poster, you saw the movie. Sorry, no surprises. And that's what I see as the problem with most of the Killer Santa movies. They're terribly derivative and very predictable because it's all about fetishizing that red suit. Look at what we force that red suit to do. Now, the Killer Santa movies vary in their level of cruelty. There's even a Norwegian film called Christmas Cruelty that pushes the limits of on-screen gore. But no matter how much gore there is, it's the same damn thing over and over again. They're still partying like it's 1984. Now, I like being shocked and grossed out, but not at the expense of scares or surprises. And unfortunately, those movies don't scare me or surprise me. And then there's another version of the Killer Santa movie where he's a supernatural force. You'd think these movies might have some promise. But a very interesting thing happens when the supernatural gets added. The movies get ridiculous. Not just the premise, but the movies themselves go for silly, intentionally. Case in point is Santa's Sleigh. Sleigh as in S-L-A-Y, that is. This movie stars Goldberg, the wrestler, as Santa. But Santa is really a demon who lost a bet with an angel, and for centuries he's been forced to be nice and give presents. Until now. In the opening scene, Santa crashes the Christmas dinner of the most obnoxious family ever. Everyone at the table is either a famous comedian like Fran Drescher or an overactor like James Caan who hams it up. Santa kills everyone in a bloody version of basically a Three Stooges routine, while Fran Drescher makes her famous noises. When I watched this, I literally couldn't figure out who they made this movie for. Christmas lovers won't watch it, and it's not scary, and Bad Santa is a better nasty comedy. And this movie, it has a weird self-congratulatory tone, like a kid who mocks everything to show how cool he is. And who knows, maybe that's the audience. But it's not just the movie Santa's Sleigh. Movies like Jack Frost and The Gingerbread Man have ludicrous stories that take a supernatural look at Christmas icons, but they're goofy. They're self-parody. Nobody in their right mind could take these films seriously, let alone be scared by them. And maybe that's the point. Because if nobody can take these movies seriously, nobody can be offended. These movies might be gory and tasteless, but you know what? They're actually pretty safe. It interests me that when Christmas horror movies do creep into that supernatural territory or old world mythology, say like Krampus, they bring in that broad comedy. It's like the storytellers feel they need to tread lightly. You better watch out. And maybe they do need to watch out. In 2005, the horror movie Wolf Creek was released in the U.S. on December 25th, Christmas Day. It was ravaged by the critics as tasteless and heartless exploitation and torture porn. Now, Wolf Creek is not a Christmas horror movie. It's a horror movie that was released on Christmas Day. And more than one of the critics prominently mentioned the release date in their reviews as a reason to hate it. But hey, Christmas horror movies are obviously very popular just as they are, and there's nothing wrong with that. I like a good trash movie, and I like movies that are so bad they're good. I just feel that they are very well represented in the Christmas marketplace, and I feel that a great opportunity for strong horror films is being missed. I think it's safe to say that the Christmas season brings out a lot of anxiety and stress and family tension and even childhood trauma. And a good horror film gives us a safe place to confront these emotions and acknowledge that shadow self we all carry with us, yes, even on Christmas. So I want to honor the Christmas horror movies that I consider some of the better ones for people who value the pleasure of a good shiver on Christmas. Some of these movies create real tension and scares in real-world settings. Some of these movies dive into the rich vein of old-world legends and the supernatural. I was really torn about whether to put Michael Dougherty's Krampus on this list. It's frustrating because there was so much potential around a movie based on this German Christmas folklore character who became popular in the internet age. But instead of going fully to the dark side, which is what the traditional Krampus is all about, the movie protects itself with broad comedy every chance it gets. And yet, there are a few effective scenes in the film, like the introduction to Krampus is very good. And Krampus himself, who wears a death mask of what looks like Santa on his face. He's a scary presence. There are scenes that have a strong tone of foreboding, and some of the toys that come to life are very inventive and very spooky. But the reason I give the movie an honorable mention here is the ending to the film. The last 10 minutes, it reaches the kind of potential that I had hoped for. But sadly, it's a reminder of what could have been for the rest of the movie. Now, by their nature, horror movies are supposed to upset the apple cart, and the traditional Krampus is the embodiment of upsetting the apple cart. And that goes for a lot of the old world creatures that are associated with the holiday. Many of them are pagan in their origin, and they were adopted by Christianity. And they reflect a world where life was hard, and there were no promises, and nature was far from tamed. And there are the rare few horror movies that dive into that rich vein of folk horror headfirst and bring that world back into our modern world. And I hope that more filmmakers are encouraged to mine this material, because the movies that have done so are original, smart, and creepy. The next movie I want to talk about is 2010's Rare Exports, A Christmas Tale, directed by Jalmari Highlander. The setting of Rare Exports is at the border of northern Finland and the Russian Federation. In this movie, the land is a character itself. The terrain is so rugged and isolated and forbidding that it feels like it's from an old fable. The people who live in the small village are ranchers who live off the land by herding reindeer to sell the meat. Yeah, reindeer meat. These rangers are as tough as the land, and their close community is utilitarian and tight. Everything counts on the money from that meat. Survival. Of course, something has the ranchers riled up. They have intruders from a global corporation. A billionaire, his scientists, and American demolitionists are drilling and blasting on top of a nearby mountain. The billionaire is digging for a unique treasure. He believes that the mountain is really a lost burial mound for something very old and very big. At least one person agrees with him, and that's Ani, the young son of one of the ranchers. Ani is a student of the folklore of the area, and he believes that centuries ago, the villagers trapped, froze, and buried Santa Claus. The idea that they might find Santa terrifies him, because this isn't the American version of Santa. This is Joulupuki, the Yule goat, a pagan god that ran with Odin on the wild hunts. And he was not pleasant company, especially not for children. Let's put it this way. You had to do some very horrible things to get a burial mound the size of a small mountain to keep you gone. No sooner than the billionaire blasts holes in the mountain, bad things start happening. First, all the reindeer in the corral are slaughtered. The meat, what's left, is unusable. Then, supplies start to disappear. Then, children start to disappear. Ani's father sets wolf traps, and he catches an unexpected predator, a wounded and naked elderly man with a dirty beard. The ranchers are convinced that this man is involved with whatever the researchers are doing on the mountain, and that it's connected somehow to the death of the reindeer. So, they decide to hold this person hostage and demand payment from the billionaire. They do not know what they have. Ani thinks he does, and he goes to see this thing with his own eyes. Things get creepy when this old man sees the boy. The old man had been nearly catatonic, but when he sees the boy, he gets energized. And then, well, watch the movie and see. This movie has a satirical premise and some absurd humor to it, but when the monsters get revealed, the director takes it dead serious. The modern world is what's treated with silliness. The old world from under the earth is not. If you know the folklore around the premise of the story, you also know there's an awesome twist to what's going to happen. And I love the satirical message that the movie gives. We exploit and commodify our dark past, and we bury the old history under new history. And that brings me to the next movie, 2010's Sint, a Dutch film directed by Dick Moss. It also goes by the names Saint and Saint Nick. This is a killer Santa movie, or more accurately, a killer Sinterklaas movie. Sinterklaas, by the way, is considered the primary source for our modern-day Santa. Now, whereas most killer Santa movies try to be transgressive, they usually hit the brakes at blaspheming the red suit. Sint hurls itself into transgressive territory head first. To get an idea of just how unhinged Sint is, you need to know a little bit about St. Nicholas and where he comes from. As he's celebrated today, St. Nicholas is a benevolent gift giver dressed in bishop's robes and wears a red mitre hat, and he carries a shepherd's staff. He arrives in Amsterdam from Spain by way of a steamboat, and he brings presents like chocolate letters of the alphabet to children. December 5th is considered the anniversary of his death, and on that night, St. Nicholas rides his white horse on the Amsterdam rooftops. However, scholars believe that St. Nicholas is the Christian version of Odin, who also rides a horse in the sky and brings chocolate runes, the Norse alphabet, to children. Which makes sense because even though he's a saint, there's no proof St. Nicholas was a real person. Even though St. Nicholas is one of the most popular saints in Greek and Latin churches, his existence can't be confirmed in any historical documents. In an article about St. Nicholas, Christianity Today says they really don't know much about him. The article says, all we can say is that he was probably the bishop of Myra around the year 300. The article goes on. There are, of course, many legends about Nicholas, and since these have influenced people throughout history, and they likely illustrate something about the historical man, they are fair game for a publication like ours devoted to Christian history. Well, it seems that writer-director Dick Moss felt the same way. Turnabout is fair play, so he makes up his own legend and lore about St. Nicholas, and it's a doozy. In this film, the church used revisionist history to hide the true past of St. Nicholas from the public, because in reality, St. Nicholas was a renegade apostate bishop who used his gang of followers to sail from Spain to Holland to ransack villages. The movie opens in 1492 in a village that will become modern Amsterdam. The villagers have had enough of Nicholas's reign of terror and they massacre his gang. They set fire to his pirate ship while he's on it, and he dies horribly. Now, legend has it that every time there's a full moon on December 5th, the ghost of Sinterklaas and his gang of Black Pete's come to Amsterdam to kill as many people as possible in one night, especially children. Now, Sint is an homage to the slasher films of the 1980s. There's even a shot early in the film that mimics an iconic scene from Halloween, but not one you'd immediately think of. This movie recreates a Steadicam shot that introduces the three teenage girls as they walk down the streets of Haddonfield, except here there is snow instead of trees. And there is ample gore in this film and a staggering body count by the end. But Sint is much richer than most of the slasher films of the 1980s. The ghostly Sinterklaas looks amazingly creepy riding his horse in full bishop regalia silhouetted on foggy streets. And even though the movie has a tongue-in-cheek humor all the way throughout, it genuinely wants to give you some scares. The movie sets a tone that makes us feel a sense of danger, and we invest in the characters. And Moss has fun pushing buttons by having the most beloved religious figure who only existed as a benevolent legend brutally murder children. Amsterdam is filled with non-believers with questionable morals who blindly follow the traditions that set them up for easy slaughter under the full moon. There's one true believer whose family was slaughtered during the last full moon. He spends the entire movie debunking the traditions and replacing them with the wild ones that Dick Haas came up with. And the taboo of killing children is broken, in the first 5 minutes. And let's just say that there's a shot towards the end of the film that, once you realize what you're looking at, will make your stomach drop. But the idea that is the most subversive in the entire movie is that the police, the government, and the church know that all of this is going to happen. They try to minimize the body count while they devise cover stories as the carnage happens. Amsterdam is an ancient city that has a ghost it must feed, that it must give offerings to. As the mayor says to the police chief, you don't have to feel guilty. This city has learned to cope with this centuries ago. One day it will end, but I don't think we'll see that day. Civilizations and governments and cities are built on blood-drenched soil. What if every city was held accountable for its past? What if every city still had to appease the gods? What legend and lore would you devise to hide that? There's one constant in most Christmas horror movies, whether they're supernatural or not, and that's children. Just like children are the central focus of the Christmas holiday, children are ground zero for the Christmas horror movie as well. It's a threat to the children that drives the plot of these horror movies, because a threat to children automatically cranks up the tension, because they are small, and they are fragile, and they are innocent. We instinctively want to protect the children. And yet, have you ever watched a child during a full-blown, out-of-control temper tantrum? The unfiltered rage, the immediate surrender to violence? Or have you ever walked into a room where a group of children were playing and they stop everything when you enter and they just stare at you? And you look around at the mess of toys and you can almost see a pattern. The kid logic is just out of your grasp, but you can swear that there's an order to this chaos. You know they were planning something, and you'll never figure it out, and they'll never tell you. It's that unknowable nature of children and how we as adults dismiss their behavior until something goes critical that puts the chill into the next movie. Tom Shanklin's 2008, The Children. Now, this isn't the first movie with killer kids in it. There's Patty McCormick in The Bad Seed and Village of the Damned and 1976's notorious Who Can Kill a Child and its remake Come Out and Play. But The Children is the most disturbing one because the children feel real and the adults feel real. But mostly, it's because the movie itself is that playroom with the scattered toys that almost look like a pattern, and you desperately try to understand the kid logic and figure out the plan, but it's just out of your grasp until it's too late. The movie follows the families of two sisters who spend Christmas together at one of their homes, a secluded cottage at the edge of the woods. The sisters both have husbands and children. Chloe, whose cottage is the home for the holidays, has 2 young children. Elaine has 3, 2 young ones and 1 rebellious teenager. It becomes apparent quickly that the relationship between the sisters is strained and there's competition going on. It also becomes apparent how quickly the parent world and the children world separate from each other. The parents are self-involved and they send the kids off to play with each other so the grown-ups can brag about their parenting skills. And this movie is full of examples of how parents can purport to do things for the good of the children, but the motives are really driven by selfishness. Children are bribed to do chores with gold stars. They are also bribed to leave the parents alone with the same stars. The children are put together in a room, isolated from the adults. And in those close quarters, the children are also incubating. One of Elaine's kids throws up when he reaches the home, and the parents chalk it up to car sickness. But he is acting strangely, and he scares one of the girls with how he acts. And soon, another boy starts sneezing, and he starts talking in gibberish. What's scary is that all this is standard issue for children at play. One gets sick, they all get sick. One talks in gibberish, they all do it. You wouldn't notice anything strange unless you paid very close attention and started to notice the patterns. The Children is an intense and disturbing experience. Director Tom Shanklin frames most of the action in the liminal space. We only see parts of the action, and he cuts back and forth between 2 simultaneous events just to keep us in suspense. Visual images are repeated, and each time we see just a little more, but not enough. Tents in the yard and sleds and piles of toys take on a malevolent appearance. What are the children whispering to each other? Where's the cat? Why do the toys in the room look like they are deliberately positioned as if there's some bigger design at work? By the time you realize that each toy and tent and sled fit together into a plan, it's too late. And the result is terrifying. The Children doesn't give you explanations or reasons or relief. And it builds its horror off the anxieties that the holidays bring out in all families. Childhood trauma, the fear of not being good enough, the fear of not belonging, and the fear that someone you love has changed into something you don't recognize since the last time you saw them. The horror is that even with family, you never really know someone, even your children. There's one more movie I want to mention. I consider it the best Christmas horror movie ever made, the original 1975 Black Christmas, directed by the late, great, and underrated Bob Clark. But I know that it's a personal choice, and it's been so influential to slasher movies that if you were to watch it for the first time now, you might be underwhelmed. It is the first "the killer is inside the house" horror movie. But I will say that I think if you give it a chance, you'll be shocked at how profoundly dark and disturbing the movie still feels after all these years. There are 2 shots in the film that will send chills up the spine of the most jaded horror fans. Bob Clark wanted to see if the audience would accept a movie where you never see the killer and all the questions are left unanswered. They did, in time, because this movie became the template for the slasher film. So Black Christmas gets on my list through a grandfather clause. And there is my small list of Christmas horror movies I think deserve praise for being real horror movies. And I'm hopeful that these films can get rediscovered and they'll inspire another filmmaker to make a Christmas horror movie that takes the chance to be scary, to make a movie that doesn't soften the blows with broad humor that removes any real tension. When you go with broad humor, you diffuse any chances to get to the real emotions that you go to horror movies to exercise. Hey, it's okay to admit that the holidays can bring anxiety and fear and loneliness and loss and grief and uncertainty. And for some of us, a good horror movie works better for curing those Christmas blues than a peppermint schnapps ever would. So enjoy these horror movies and enjoy the season with family and friends in the time-honored traditions you're accustomed to. Swinging poles with horse skulls on them. Thanks so much for listening to my show. A couple weeks back, I did a guest spot on the Wrong Reel podcast, where co-host James Hancock and I talked about Bloody Sam, the great director Sam Peckinpah. If you're interested, then go check out the Wrong Reel podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, and Google Play-based Android apps. Also, this week I was on the Milwaukee Mob podcast to talk about The Town That Dreaded Sundown. You can hear that Milwaukee Mob podcast on Blog Talk Radio. And one of our Wretched Roundtable participants recently posted an interview with me on his website EchoBase. That's ECHOBA.SE. So EchoBase, but between the A and the S, there's a dot. I know that's a lot. While you're at it, another website to check out is that of another listener, Eric Slager. His horror website is wolfbaneblooms.com, and it's fun. I'll have links to all these up at my website, hellbentforhorror.com. And thanks for listening to my show. I'd love to hear back from you. You can email me directly at scott@hellbentforhorror.com. And I've also updated my Hellbent for Horror website, hellbentforhorror.com. You can download every episode directly from there, read any newsletters, and you can go to any of my social websites and emails all from the homepage. You can IM me on my Facebook page at facebook.com/hellbentforhorror, and you can find me on Twitter at hellbenthorror. A lot of the great conversations I have with fans happens on Twitter at hellbenthorror. Now, for you, the listeners of Hellbent for Horror, Audible is offering a free audiobook download with a free 30-day trial to give you the opportunity to check out their service. To download your free audiobook today, go to audibletrial.com/Hellbent for Horror. If you like the show and you're curious about audiobooks, sign up for the service through Hellbent for Horror. It helps make this podcast sustainable for me. I thank you in advance. And thank you for listening, folks. Hellbent for Horror was written and broadcast by me, S.A. Bradley, and produced by me and Lisa Gorski. You can now subscribe to the Hellbent for Horror podcast on iTunes, Google Play, Player FM, and Stitcher. And if you like the show, please consider writing a review on iTunes or Stitcher or Google Play. It really helps. Till next time, stay hellbent.